What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 4 of All About the Arcades podcast. My name is Joe, also known as JJ General One. I'll be your host. Today we have a very special guest, guys. I've known him for a couple years now, probably almost about 3 years, I'd say, and I actually met him through Reddit. And if you don't know what Reddit is, it's like a website of everything. Check it out. Seriously, it's a lot of fun. But if you guys want to check out where I met, his name is MewTwoStruckBack, Mike Lucas from Pittsburgh. And guys, if you want to check out where he's most well known, would be reddit.com/r/DaveandBusters, all one word. But that's where I met him, guys. And then I started talking to him and found him at Dave and Busters, and we started talking. And now we're really good friends. But Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so, guys, if you don't know Mike from my YouTube channel or anything like that, his name is MewTwoStruckBack. His online handle is MewTwoStruckBack. It's all one word. And he is I don't know how to say it exactly, but he is the muscle memory master and just like jackpot guru. Now he's going to admit here that he's not the best at everything, and that's probably true. I'm sure there's other people that are better at stuff, some of the games, than he is. I know I'm better at Deal or No Deal than he is. Oh, yeah. But guys, he's known, like, he's the one that you see on my channel all the time doing like the skee ball jackpots and, you know, going from 0 tickets to winning an iPad in one night. And if you haven't seen that video, seriously, check it out, guys. It's on my channel. It's at Main Event Entertainment here in Pittsburgh. But Mike, just a little introduction about yourself. You know, who are you? You know, what do you do in life? You know, maybe a little background about yourself. Just let everyone know who you are.
All right, so basically I've had people call me the godfather of arcade advantage play. And I would also say a jack of all trades, master of none. I can do a lot of games real well. There's a few that are, you know, I'm not the best at, but it's being able to do a lot of different things that's really got me into this whole arcade thing. I was an arcade rat since pretty much late elementary school, early middle school. People would take me to the arcade at the Century 3 Mall before it became a complete dive. Probably once a week. I'd go to Kennywood. I'd pretty much do nothing there but play the arcade games. And that led into Dave and Busters, when they opened, had a lot of the same games as some of these other arcades, but the payouts were better, and I realized I can get back more than what I'm spending. And that's really what led me into this whole arcade thing. Outside of there, I'm a big Pokemon nut. I am absolutely obsessed with Mewtwo, hence the username. The history behind the username, this will be a random point for this podcast that anyone else outside of arcades will probably never hear. When I was creating usernames back in the days of AOL, which shows how old we are,
been there, done that.
AOL 3.0. They extended it to allow 16 character usernames, and I was obsessed with the first Pokemon movie, so I tried Mewtwo Strikes Back. One too many letters, it says. Okay, Struck Back, we'll shorten it, and that name has stuck for me darn near everywhere ever since.
Yeah, that's kind of funny that you bring up AOL, because I mean, everybody's kind of asking me how I came up with my name, and that's pretty much where it came from. There were settings like, you know, kids, teen, everyone, and then general. And it was like, okay, so my initials are JJM, and my dad's like, well, everyone calls you JJ in school. Let's just do JJ to the general level and then the number 1. And it's like, okay, and that just kind of stuck. So a little tip for you guys to listen to the podcast here. I know not everyone that watches the videos listens to this, so you guys are finding out something that the people that, you know, don't come over here and listen to this, you're finding out something that not everyone knows.
Oh man, that takes me back. AOL general level. I remember putting a keylogger on the computer, copying my mom's password, and then assigning myself the general level. And I think at that point she gave up trying to control what I did online, so we just left it alone after that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when you said about being an arcade rat since back in the day. And, I mean, I'm the exact same way. Probably since about the late 80s. I'd say around 87, 88 I started. So I've been doing this for 30 years, man. Like just playing arcade games, getting into it, like skee ball, pinball, things like that. Back when Mortal Kombat was released and things like that, when the games came out in the arcades before they came on the consoles, and then they had to be ported to the consoles. Like, that's my era of the arcades. But it's kind of funny, did you brought all that up with everything, because you're stirring memories up in me as well, and it's really funny. But so, like, I mean, do you remember, like, what really got you into the arcades, Mike? I mean, is there a specific incident, or you just kind of, like, started going and you were, like, playing these games, or like, oh, this is a lot of fun, or, like, taking your cutting the grass allowance or whatever it was, your chores allowance to the arcade and spending all those quarters? Like, what got you into the arcades?
Oh, let's see. Well, I think it was more that my mom and my grandparents, back when they were both around, got me a Nintendo when I was 5. I rolled with that. A couple years later, Super Nintendo comes out. I end up with that under the tree, and so many games that pretty much just became everything I did for a while. And I'm sure at some point I ended up getting dragged along to the mall with my parents. Well, Century 3 again before it completely went to crap.
Just a quick note for everyone. Century 3 Mall is in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, and it actually just went up for sheriff's sale this month. It was a huge mall, like 4 levels. I mean, it's like it was kind of like 4 levels. It was really weirdly built, kind of like a split level house, kind of like that idea. It had like multiple floors that were like that, and just, I call it a 4 level because there were essentially 4 levels, but there really weren't. It's more like 2, and then you kind of went up a little bit higher to another one, although it was still considered 2 at that point. But yeah, that mall has, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, seen a very, very hefty decline, and is now up for sheriff's sale as of the recording of this podcast.
I'll give him $1 for it.
Oh, dude, there's like nothing left in there. Seriously, I think the only thing left in there that's sustaining anything is the Cash-In Culture Store.
I thought they closed.
They might have moved.
Let's just turn it into a paintball arena.
I'll put it this way: even the Aces Breakaway and Play took their games out of there and sent them to other stores, even though they were sustaining pretty well still. They were like one of the few stores that were still sustaining.
That's because they had the Cherry Master machines, and there were people in there gambling all the time. The arcade operated at a loss. I worked for him. He told me this.
Shh, don't say that too loud. All right. Well, anyways, yeah, Mike, thank you for letting us know about you and everything in your background. Now, you're a very unique individual. I mean, I'm going to say this, just okay, he's laughing over here, but it's true, and he's very open about talking about it, but you guys may or may not know that Mike is actually autistic. He's known as what is a functioning autistic, and that's kind of why he can focus on the games so well. It's just kind of surprising that, the flashing lights and the sounds and stuff don't, like, trigger something in you to be scared or have a what is that called, a breakdown or an episode, if you will.
Yeah.
So how does that work into with the arcades and stuff? You're very open about talking about it, so that's why we're bringing it up. So
okay, so there's different levels of autism, and I'm basically under what you'd call Aspergers, which is a type of high functioning autism. The downsides being it's tougher to deal with social skills sometimes. That took me a long time to deal with. The upside, attention to detail, and one of the big things about dealing with arcades, when you have Asperger's, you take very well to repetitive tasks, doing the same thing over and over. A normal person, you have them go into an arcade and play the same game 75 times, they're bored out of their mind. They don't want to be there. They're done with that. But somebody with Asperger's, man, it's just as fun knocking the 75th jackpot out of that game as it is the first. So that lends itself very well. Also, the focus on math, percentages. Back in the day, I put out a guide online, whether this was a good or bad idea. It's something I did at the time. I put out a guide that listed every game's cost down to the 10th of a cent, every game's ticket payout and what that meant in real world dollars, how many times you'd need to jackpot it, one out of every so many, as to whether or not you'd be breaking even or coming out ahead. So knowing all that just off the top of my head, any new game that goes into any arcade anywhere, I'm sitting there looking, okay, how much does this cost? What can I win? What's going to be my net profit if I win this game? If I sit here and play this forever, if it's a game that I can hit forever, how much am I going to make an hour? Is that better than what I would be doing at work? Is that better than what I would be otherwise doing with my free time? It's not just about coming out ahead. It's about coming out ahead enough that it's worth you driving to whatever arcade this is and going there and sitting there for X amount of hours and playing one or more, now way more, games over and over.
And that's interesting. You bring up the whole math thing because I actually have a video of you doing Tailgate Toss. It's been up on my channel for, I want to say, almost a year now, where the first video was you getting to 99999, and the second video was over the 99999 to, I think, 139,000 you threw it to?
Yeah, I did 139 in your video. I'm up to 150 now. They just put new bags in Tailgate when they fixed it this week at Dave & Buster's in Homestead, and I actually managed to throw a 153, which I've never pulled off before.
And that's impressive. But guys, the reason why I bring up that video is you're going to notice on there, at one point, he actually throws a bag into a wrong hole. And it screws up the calculations of, okay, I need to do this now. And he adjusts on the fly for the amount of points that he needs to get the jackpot, and without overscoring, because that's one of the games, we'll get into this a little bit later, but it's one of the games where if you overscore the jackpot by more than, 5,000 points, it'll go up to that new score as a penalty, if you will. Whereas if you score between the required and less than 5,000, it'll only go up by 5,000. So, but we'll get into that a little bit further whenever we're talking about the actual arcades and things like that.
Right. The one thing I want to say while it's fresh on my mind, it is better to intentionally lose a game or even tilt the machine intentionally and take a full loss, which I'll get into later, than to overscore by a significant amount.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's, yeah, and sometimes that's a strategy there, guys, so take heed. Sometimes, if you realize you're going to either screw up like a game really bad and it has a tilt like that, set the tilt off so it's considered a loss and it doesn't count that score.
I did that last week.
As of the recording of this podcast. So anyways, guys, I brought up a little bit earlier the subreddit that I met Mike on. Again, that's reddit.com/r/Dave and Busters, all one word, no apostrophes. That's the subreddit that has been around for, God, how many years now?
Well, I'll look it up while we're doing this.
Okay, he's going to look it up. It says how long it's been around, but
it's REDDIT, not READIT for your people that aren't familiar.
Understandable, yes. Reddit, it's REDDIT. You started this subreddit as a way to reach out to other people maybe and find out if there's anyone else kind of like you or that can do this kind of skill at the arcade of, as you said, making it worthwhile to go, not just coming out ahead, because you have to look at, as you said, all the costs and everything. You got to ship out the prizes. You have to pay, if you sell on eBay, like eBay fees, things like that. You have to factor that into if you're going to make any profit or not, or if it's even worth it to go to the arcade. In our case, those of us that play for that type of come ahead at the arcade.
Yeah. It's been around for 6 years, but I've been doing this for 18 at this point. I haven't been uploading to YouTube that long, but after putting up a couple of videos that got popular, I realized there wasn't a community for this. So I wanted to share strategy, share info, share intel, and put it out there. I did 2 AMAs, or Ask Me Anything threads, where I just put out there, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is how many tickets I've won, ask me anything about what I do. And after that took off, that's when I'm like, this can't just be dealt with in one thread. This needs its own community. And I started the Dave and Buster subreddit, for which has had its ups and downs and has its positives and negatives, and much to the chagrin of a few people.
Yeah, you had an issue with a guy. Now, you guys may not remember this. Some of you guys are definitely younger. Dave and Buster's used to have interesting ceiling fans that were motor driven by belts. There was one motor, and it would be connected to a series of fans by these belts. And there was a guy there who basically just posted about ceiling fans all day. And let's just say he's a long time been banned, but that's one of the downs, if you will, of the subreddit. But one of the ups of the subreddit, people like me finding out about it because I go to Dave and Buster's and things like that. And it's like, hey, I wonder if there's like a community for people talking about this kind of stuff. And then I find him and I find out he's local to me. And then I start talking to him, and all of a sudden I'm doing the exact same thing that he's doing. Even though, I already had the skills, I just didn't know that I could actually do that. And, finding the subreddit and everything was totally interesting and kind of a fluke, really. Just kind of happened. Me searching for it, and it just popped up. But, you kind of covered, I have a couple questions, listed here, why it exists, what's it about, and you kind of touched on that. What has it evolved into over those 6 years? Since you started it to now, what is some of the differences that you have noticed and things that we've come across that have happened in the Reddit?
I'm actually going to take this further back than the 6 years, but I'll include the Reddit part in this. I've been doing this since 2000 when Dave & Buster's opened in Homestead. So I've been doing this for 18 years. I really started into there and quit going to other places. I'm going to tell the Kennywood story, which Joe is familiar with.
Quick side note, guys, if you don't know what Kennywood is an amusement park in West Mifflin, just east of Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's kind of where myself, Matt, will do some of our carnival games and things like that. It's a amusement park of rides, games, and other stuff. So like you would find anywhere, just we have one in Pittsburgh.
Okay, so back near the tail end of me concentrating on playing games at Kennywood, they had a game called Spin Doctor. It's basically a skill stop slot machine, and imagine if you could control the reels of the slot machine in Vegas, but you only had about a third of the normal space to stop it on the 7. Well, that didn't stop me, and I was just sitting there hitting the bonus about every other quarter on average. It was a quarter a roll and 200 tickets when you won. So I got a blender out of there for about $20. I racked up about 9,000 tickets. To be nice to them, I left that area and went somewhere a little more secluded to count the tickets and sort them out so that they wouldn't have to do that. By the time I walked back in there to cash in my tickets, they had lowered the jackpot from 200 to 50. I asked to speak to the arcade manager at the time, and he said, "Oh, it was always supposed to be like that. That was a mistake." Well, how come the second place prize for when you're just short of the jackpot is 50 then? So they would never admit that they just couldn't handle my action. And the fact that I got a $20 blender for $20 was offensive to them, to the point that they decided they were going to change the payouts on the spot. I think that was the first time that I had a jackpot value changed on me on the spot, but it won't be the last, and we'll get into that story later on.
And if you guys don't know, when they change a jackpot to lowering it, we call that nerfing it.
Yeah,
basically like the Nerf guns, if you will. We've been shot in the butt by a Nerf bullet because we kind of did it to ourselves by either running too many tickets through the game, and the arcade's not making any profit on it anymore or something like that. But now, if they raise a jackpot, if for some reason they raise the jackpot from, let's say 250 to 500 tickets or even higher, that's called a buff, and that basically means it's in our advantage, our favor to jackpot that game then, because it's more tickets for the same price.
Nerf and Buff actually come from online games where they make balance patches and tweaks to how the game works, and it carried over into the arcade lexicon. But anyway, so we are bailing on Kennywood. Dave & Buster's opens. I realize, oh my god, they have some of the same games that Kennywood did. oh my God, they pay out 4 times as well, and I can actually sit here and win this jackpot over and over and get things worth more than what I was paying to play. At this point, this began my adventure as an advantage player, or somebody that's coming out ahead with the money they spend. So this wasn't a huge thing. There weren't coupons to get chips cheaper. You couldn't even do a $100 load on your card. It had to be $20 at a time. So you were spending about 20 cents a chip, which is double what we spend now. But there were certain games that could be hit consistently, but they didn't have spin and win yet, which is something else we'll touch on later, which was one of the big, expensive, but heavily rewarding skill games of its time. But I'd go in there and I'd knock out 10, 20,000 tickets, and that was a huge deal back then. And this continued on, but I didn't really have a way to profit from it until a couple years later, a friend of mine at college got me into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And I found out through circumstance and a bit of luck that there was a market for bulk quantities of cards. You know, those shoe boxes full of commons that weren't really worth much anything. I'd be like, oh, you got 2,000 cards? Yeah, I'll pay you $20. And then I had a guy that would buy them for 60. So what I started doing is I would win things like PSPs, iPod videos, other electronics, games, and I would trade those to people for their cards of equivalent value, but I'd make 3-to-1 flipping the cards. So everything I got out of Dave & Buster's was going at triple rate. Well, they still didn't have Half Price Wednesday, but what they did do is they had Spin and Win, which is that giant wheel where the light spins around. There's a green dot in 3 different places. If you stop it on the green dot, you win 1,000 tickets, which is big for that place. Well, they started carrying the iPod video, and Dave & Buster's massively underpriced it for what it was worth. So I was only paying what we deemed $230 worth of tickets for a $300 item that I was trading for 30,000 commons that went for $900. So money was just rolling in at this point. And I didn't need to worry about the profitability so much of any individual game when I had this kind of avenue to move the prizes. That wasn't always there, but it was nice while it was. So we're chugging along, and Dave & Buster's tries this thing, Halloween of 2007. Come in Halloween, all the games are going to be half price. This was a beta test.
Oh, and I'm sure that this is the start of something just incredible and crazy at this point, because we all know half-price games just totally benefits people like you and me, and even your common person that wants to go and spend $20, that now turns into $40. You know, and most people don't look at it that way.
Kinda.
But you know, if you think about it, you know, you're spending, you buy $20 in chips, you now get $40 in gameplay, and it's you know, a lot of people are like, oh, hey, my dollar goes a little bit further, I'm going to come back and do this.
So this was a one-time thing then, and then it went away. Then they did it as a test run for about a half year to a year on every Wednesday. Then they quit. Then the backlash from them quitting was so bad that they brought it back as a permanent thing, and it's been around ever since. In the guide that I was giving away for some time, I started listing the Wednesday costs, and also there was something called gold discount. If you spent $300 worth of gameplay on one card, you would get 10% off on anything you played through that card's lifetime. That kind of went away when they rolled out their new program, but there were all these different values it was going to cost you to play any individual game. But anyway, moving on. So from the period that they rolled out half price up through, I would say, last year. So this was a good 9 to 10 year period. There was always one game on the floor that you could just sit there and knock tickets out of infinitely. A lot of games now have payout rates or controls. It's going to let you win or it's not. It's like those cherry master machines at bars. It's either going to line up the sevens or cherries, or no matter what you do, no matter what you hit, it's going to skip it off by one.
And that's kind of going on the point of like what I've talked in the past episodes, the E-claws for claw machines. They have payout rates, and if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, check out the previous episode. I believe it's episode 2, where I talked about the different types of arcade games, and then episode 3 with guest Matt3756, who is the claw guy. Check him out as well on YouTube, but he gave pointers and tips on claw machines and things like that, and kind of rebuffed what I said in episode 2. But that's just kind of touching on the payout rates if you want to get an idea of what that's about. So,
okay, so back in the day, spin and win, any given play didn't have an impact on the next play. So it's just like a roulette wheel. The ball could land in 0 17 times in a row, or it could never land in it. So if you had the skill to hit it over and over, it would pay out over and over. There was a game called Speed Demon, which worked similarly. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but if you go to my YouTube channel, which is my same username as everywhere, MewTwoStruckBack, you'll see one of my very early videos was me hitting the jackpot on this particular game. So you'll get an idea. The non-random part of the game worked pretty much exactly like spin and win, except you had to hit a button 3 times, but the lights moved around a lot slower. That game could be hit infinitely. They eventually made that harder, and I went back to spin and win. Then a game called Tippin' Blocks came out. There are so many stories about this game that it's going to get its own segment in this podcast. I will come back to that later because I don't want to derail the topic here. But I knock literally millions of tickets out of that game in short order. They let me play fair play to Dave & Buster's. They let me have at it without changing the payout for 7 months. They got a software update, went back to spin and win. They changed the settings on that, but at the same time they did that, we all figured out a game called Slam-A-Winner Extreme, which if you've seen it from Joe's channel or mine, there's plenty of videos of us hitting the jackpot on that. One thing I'm going to bring up before I forget, Slam-A-Winner was one of the perfect AP games because you hit a button, a ball drops through a tube the same exact way every time. There was no variance. So you can change a payout rate on a computer game. You can make a certain block or obstacle move one way or the other to let the player win or not. You're not going to rig a ball going through a tube. You're not going to rig a beanbag going through a hole. You're not going to rig a football. So any games with those physical objects to it became ones that you knew what you were getting into without having to look up the manual for the game. So spin and win came and went. They finally changed the payout, or not the payout, but the cost. They raised the cost 50%. Somewhere around there, a game called Whack and Win came out. Hit a foam hammer on basically one of those test your strength things, exactly hard enough, not too hard, not too soft. We killed that for a while. They changed it. They had a game called Zombie Snatcher, which is basically one of those prize arm games. You hit a button, an arm moves, there's pucks on a playfield. If your arm knocks one of the pucks off the playfield into the chute, you win whatever amount of tickets is on it. They changed something on that to make it so you couldn't sit there and hit it all the time. A game called Space Invaders Frenzy came out around then. And the way the software worked, you could darn near hit that every time. I know people that still have access to one of the old settings. I'm not going to say where, but they're still out there. They're still hitting hundreds of thousands of tickets every week off that game to this day. But they're out there.
Yeah, and going on that, guys, we do have to kind of censor ourselves a little bit to an extent because some of these people that still partake in these games that should be updated but haven't been are friends of ours or really close members of the community, the AP community, if you will, and that stands for Advantage Player, which is what Mike refers to himself as and some of these other people that can turn the profit from the arcade. But real quick, I just want to go back real quick. Mike was saying like up to last year. Now, I mean, I don't know when you guys are listening to this. It could be, in the way distant future, but last year references 2017 because we're recording this podcast in 2018, June of 2018, if you really want to get technical. So you kind of touched on some of the stuff that I have written down here, like, arcades' reactions to you, when they find out about you, what you're doing, and then also working for profit. You kind of touched on those a little bit. I want to dive in a little bit more on those in just a minute, but we got to take a quick break, guys. Going to do a quick little ad here, and then we'll be back to the podcast. The All About the Arcades podcast is brought to you by me, JJ General One. Check me out on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter at JJ General One. I also have merchandise available at Spreadshirt. Go to shop.spreadshirt.com/JJ General One or search for JJ General One on Spreadshirt.com. If you want to advertise on this podcast, you can contact me at jminkel04@comcast.net. Again, that's jminkel, M-I-N-K-E-L, 04@comcast.net with the subject advertising on the podcast. Now back to our show. Alright guys, and we are back to All About the Arcades podcast. Again, with me is Mike Lucas, also known as MewTwoStruckBack from Pittsburgh area. Like I said, if you ever want to look him up on YouTube or anything like that, his handle is MewTwoStruckBack. It's the same everywhere. He's a very interesting individual. I've known him for, like I said, for about 3 years now as of recording this podcast, and it's only been more interesting almost every day, especially as new games come out, the arcades, and the ways we handle, or should I say he handles, basically just analyzing them and figuring out if he can just take all the tickets he can from it. But before the break, we were kind of talking about, making the profits of the arcades and some of their reactions to you, like back at Kennywood and things like that. In this day and age now, you did a couple of articles. You did one on Cracked.com, and then you did a Wired article. Well, I mean, yeah. I'm just touching both of them. Yeah. It doesn't matter which order they came out in. But guys, he did a Cracked.com article. Basically, I think it was called like making $50 an hour at the arcades or something like that.
That was actually the Wired.
Oh, was that the Wired one? Okay.
The ticket kings who make $50 an hour playing arcade games.
Okay, so that was the... Which one was that?
Wired.
Okay, that one was Wired.
Cracked was funnier.
What was Cracked? Well, yeah. Well, Cracked is a comedy website. So, I mean, they're going to take some fact in what you say, but then they're going to try to twist some stuff into there to be funny.
They handled it really well.
It was really hilarious. I go back and read it every now and then. It absolutely is. Excuse me. It is hilarious. And it's something funny, but to know that they interviewed him, and I used to read that website for years before I even knew who he was, and it was like, oh, hey, he's like, I'm going to do this article, and I'm like, hey, man, I read this website, like, I read their stuff, and to know that you did that was like, oh, that's crazy. But actually, you actually had me hold on to the Kung Fu Panda video that I filmed of you doing until that video came out, because you gave them, as you put it, exclusive rights until the article came out. Yeah, until the article came out, and then I could release my video on him doing the Kung Fu Panda stuff. And speaking of Kung Fu Panda, I mean, I've kind of picked up on there's patterns to the game. You just have it mastered, and if you guys want to see this, just seriously look at any of the videos that I've put out with him in it on my channel. It's incredible. It really is. But like I said, going back to arcade's reactions to you, at this point, your reputation precedes you almost all the time, anywhere you go. If anyone has any iota of knowing the name MewTwoStruckBack, they know who you are, they know what you do. How do arcades handle you when they see you walk in or things like that?
Okay, I'm going to touch on the one story that I promised I was going to talk about earlier, and then I'm going to bring up the 3 different types of arcades and how they handle me or don't. I promised I was going to talk about tipping blocks. This is something that came up in, I believe, 2011, and there was a game called Tippin' Blocks. You basically hold a real-life paddle that you move left and right, and it moves the paddle on the screen. And your job was to catch blocks. So it was kind of like reverse Tetris. And if you got 9 blocks in a stack without dropping 3, you could miss 2, but 3 strikes and you're out. You would win, at the time, 500 tickets. Well, it was a computer game, so it was supposed to have a payout rate. Keywords, supposed to. Well, it had a mode where it tried putting blocks harder in harder positions, but the way the game worked on the what I call version 2 of the software, the one where they thought they had everything polished, was it always had to give the player what it deemed a fair shot. So it was going to make you work for it, but if you're on the left, it's going to put the block on the right and vice versa. But if you were, say, if your paddle was on the right side of the screen, you moved it just across the left, the game immediately said, okay, he went from right to left, so I have to put it on the right, but I can't put it on the very edge of the screen because at that point it would be impossible, and this game has a built-in rule as to never be impossible. So it's going to put the block just right of center. So by timing out when it was going to make the block appear, you could actually move the paddle back and forth in such a way that it would drop the block almost right on top of you every time. Long story short, your good players, once they figured this out, were winning between 80 and 90% of their games. This game was very cheap. It was 40 cents on regular days in real world money and 20 cents on Wednesday. So after me and one other guy at the local store figured this out, we basically agreed we were going to take 200,000 tickets a week out of this. Now, at this point, there weren't what we call global settings at Dave & Buster's. Global settings meaning every store should have every game set the same way, the same payouts, the same difficulty, the same everything. The stores had discretion, but because I had always been upfront and honest and basically did everything by the book, they deliberately didn't change the payout even though they were within their rights to. And that's when I said fair play to Dave & Buster's. They gave me 7 months on this game, and I'm fairly sure the people in charge dragged their feet as long as they could on installing this software update until they were told they had to give me the maximum amount of time, because I was so upfront with them on pretty much everything over the past decade plus. And they reacted well. They knew that game was losing money, but what they were losing to me, they made up on any given family of four walking through, buying dinner and buying their kids game cards. So they didn't sweat the small money. And so what I'm going to get into are the difference between 3 different kinds of arcades, Dave & Buster's being the first. They do look at what a game pays out versus what it takes in. From my understanding, on average, and this varies by game to game, they want that number to be somewhere between 30 and 40%. If a game goes over 40, that doesn't mean they're immediately going to change it. It means they're going to look at it. If it goes over 50%, they take a harder look. But that doesn't mean they're going to change it either. They're just going to make sure it's not broken. Because, okay, if a game's somehow paying the jackpot every play when it shouldn't be, that's something they need to fix. If they just have a 1 or 2 skilled players that are raising the payout rate, but it's low at every other store, they're like, oh, there's just somebody good at this game, but we're still making money overall. They leave it alone. That's what a good arcade does. They don't sweat the small money. They realize there are going to be a few people that go in and make some money, but that's okay because 99.9% of what walks in their door is giving them that money right back 100-fold. The second kind of arcade is kind of in the middle, and I'm going to use Main Event as an example. They try to be Dave & Buster's. A lot of their models are just like them. They have very similar games, often the same games. Their cost to play is roughly the same. Their tickets are worth close to the same. But Main Event doesn't have global settings. Every store is allowed to do what they want as far as payouts. So what you might see in a store like that is they might have a much more immediate negative reaction to somebody that finds a game that can be hit infinitely. I'm going to talk about one openly because they've since changed it, and it's not really going to be of much use to anyone anymore. There was a game called Jumpin' Jackpot, which is a virtual jump rope game. This game is supposed to have an auto lose on it. If you look in the manual, and yes, I'm enough of a dork to read all the manuals for these games,
Real quick, all the manuals are available online. Usually, I think there's only been like 1 or 2 games that we've not been able to find it online, and we're not sure why. If that's just proprietary information being kept secret.
They wanted paid.
Oh, they wanted paid for it.
The Spin and Win. The original Spin and Win arcade manual had to be sent to me, and the arcade that I used to work for back in 2005 through 2007 actually let me get a copy of theirs. But I emailed the company at the time, and they said they wanted $20 for a copy of the manual. I'm like, no. For Jumpin' Jackpot, there's difficulty settings 1 through 8 or A, or automatic. On automatic, it means it's going to make the game nearly impossible to win until it's taken in a certain amount of money, which is how all those games like Stacker, Barber Cut, Cut the Rope, that kind of thing, those have to function like that. And I don't begrudge them that, because if they put a $400 PlayStation in a game that costs $1.50 to play and somebody can win it every time, that game's not going to be there that long. But so I don't have any objection to a game having an auto lose function. But this game, I go in a main event one night, and I see the employees playing it, and I'm mad about this because I figure they're winning the jackpot, and that means I'm not going to win. Well, I go and play it later just because I see them win a second jackpot within a half hour. I'm like, oh, by the way, this was on a card that doesn't actually pay the ticket, so they weren't actually taking tickets. But on most games, if an employee hits a jackpot, ticket card or not, it's going to actually change the difficulty that the computer sets the game to. But I'm like, wait a second, they just hit this twice and nobody else played. There's no way. And I go and play it, and I hit the jackpot, and I'm like, oh my god, this game can be won infinitely. So for the rest of that day, plus one day the next month, I just sat there hammering this game out, and actually got 2 iPads worth of tickets out of it. Between one on each session. Thing is, it wasn't making me any more money than the other games that I could play as it is, but it was a lot faster. But when I went back on the next trip a month later, they had taken the jackpot from 250 tickets per swipe in and lowered it to 100. They didn't change the difficulty, they just made it so it wasn't worth it anymore. That one I understand, but they've had other games in there like floppy tickets, or they call it flying tickets, or Crossy Road, or even Kung Fu Panda, where after I've only been there 1 or 2 times, they've cut the jackpot in half or worse on a game that's still making them money hand over fist from 99% of people. Now, if they leave the games where at least they're viable, but they have these kind of knee-jerk reactions sometimes, that's kind of in the middle. Sometimes you might be able to talk it out with them, figure out, okay, if you really know the employees and they're open with you, they might tell you what numbers they're trying to get that machine to hit, and you can say something like, okay, I'll spread my play around a little more so that it's not affecting any one game too much, and they may actually put the jackpot back to where it was. So you've got Dave & Buster's, who is nothing but fair to the players and only changes games when they're getting beat everywhere. You've got Main Event, where they change things a little quicker and you can go from one main event to another. I've actually heard of a story of some place in Texas where there's 4 different main events that you go and play the same game with the same jackpot, or the same difficulty, same cost to play, but 4 different jackpot values between the stores. And then there's the third kind of arcade.
And before you get into the third part there, I just want to say, too, like, you're saying about the different jackpots and things like that, and, the 2 different arcades that you've described so far, Dave & Buster's Main Event, we'll call them Type 1 and Type 2. Like, Dave & Buster's is supposed to have, like, a global settings thing, and sometimes, some of the managers that may work at some of them are like, I'm going to take things into my own hands because I'm getting beat up too much. Not realizing that the company as a whole takes from across the board of all the stores and all the Crossy Road jackpots and games and payouts and everything, and factors that into, or is it a win or loss for the company? And some of these managers are like, I'm paying out too many tickets on this game, But the company's going, no, you're fine because this store is taking in 10 times as much money and not paying out any tickets at all. And it's covering your loss. It's perfectly fine. Even though your numbers are a little off, those numbers are way higher and it's making us money. We're not losing money as a corporation. As a store, it's fine. Now, I can understand if like that Dave & Buster's location was, I don't know, let's say franchised and its own location and, all the money comes out of the single owner's pocket. I can understand that in that case, where, hey, I'm going to change games and do it that way. And that's kind of what we're transitioning into to number 3 here. It's a type 3 of the arcades. There's one location that it's a one-off location, so there's only one place. And when I say one-off, I mean there's only one, this arcade only exists in one place, and there's no other arcades with this name, at least that I know of. But it's not affiliated if there is any other arcades with this exact same name. And this is the type that Mike's going to get into, and I just have to release myself from liability of what Mike is going to say here.
This is my words, not
yours.
Yours.
This is Mike's words because this is his interaction and his situation, we'll call it, with the arcade. So go ahead, Mike, proceed.
Okay. So there's type 1, type 2. Well, as you said, some Dave & Buster's managers, they tend to take it personally when somebody comes out ahead on them. They don't realize, hey, there need to be some winners and some consistent winners because if nobody's winning, then nobody's going to play because there's this whole idea that it can't be won. And so they'll lower a payout or raise a difficulty or take balls or bags out of a game and where they shouldn't be against global. Type 3 is actually a place that's pretty close to where podcast is being shot, and it's called Zone 28. It is attached to a bowling alley, which is true for all main events, but Zone 28 is a one-off chain. So Joe kept telling me, check out Zone 28. You got to come down here once, just see what it's like. And I was putting it off, and I figure, okay, I'm going to try this, but I'm going to do it when there's no one else here. So I can just, if there are any machines that can be hit, I can just blast through these. And Joe was still mad that I went the first time and didn't tell him I was going, which I understand. But I go there in the dead of the morning when I'm off from work. I go and I load up a card. And
let me just jump in real quick, Mike. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this Zone 28 also has half price Wednesdays too. It's something they're doing to try to compete with Dave & Buster's, being local. Obviously, trying to bring in the customers. It makes sense, it's something they do to try to bring in customers. But that ties into Mike's story here. I just figured to bring that up too.
Okay, they didn't have that for the first part of this story, but they did for the second. So part 1, I go there, and I go in the morning, and I put $100 on a card because they give you $40 in bonus credit when you do 100. So that, get the best deal you can. So I go and I play Crossy Road, and I'm like, oh my god, it gives you 2 tickets per step, which is way higher than anywhere else. I swipe in, hit a jackpot, swipe in, hit a jackpot. My card locks up. Their system was very touchy on how many tickets you were allowed to win. Even if you swiped more than once, it didn't recognize that there was a difference between the first credit and the second. So as soon as you won more than 1,000 tickets, it locked up your card and required a manager swipe.
And what would it say?
It would say maximum payout tickets unawarded X, but you'd still get those once the manager swiped their card. But I immediately realized, if I have to keep doing this every time, then they're going to change these games really quick because they're going to get alerted to everything that I'm hitting on. So I went and bought a second $100 card, and I would just switch between card 1 and card 2 after every time that I played a game, as to not trigger that max payout notification. They had tipping blocks on the old software too, but they ended up changing that after I was there, but that's not the big part of this story. So I still had most of my credit left, and I actually got to the point where I had the score to win so high on Crossy Road that when you factored in the bonus, but the score to win plus the bonus, since it gave you tickets per step, any given play I won the jackpot was locking up the machine every time. As it was, my mom asked me if I could win her a Keurig one-shot coffee maker, which Zone 28 had. And so I maybe spent $47 in real money and cashed out for this Keurig. So I came out a little bit ahead, and I took that and I was on my way. The very next day, I get a text from our friend Joe here. Mike, you killed Zone 28. I'm like, what? He said, they lowered the payout on Crossy from 2 tickets per step to 0.5, and they put the score to win on Down the Clown from 500 to 900 so nobody can win it. So they had such an adverse reaction to the fact that I got maybe a $60 or $80 Keurig for possibly half cost that they wanted to change everything. It's not that their machines weren't making enough money from everyone else. The fact that one guy was coming out ahead was too much for them, and that's just like Kennywood was back in 1999 or 2000. That's part one of this story. So I didn't go back to Zone 28. I actually, as you know, Matt3756 from the prior podcast and YouTube and everything, he was nice enough, since he was still going there, he bought the remainder of my value off my cards at cost, which let me break even on the money I had in. I didn't go there for the longest time, but I was still bitter about how it was handled, and I thought I'd never go there again until Joe texts me. Says, dude, they have a Nintendo Switch here. This is back when those were $400. And
also, they were really hard to come by because the stock in the stores was very, very limited. It was a very high in demand item whenever it came out, and everybody wanted one. Even Dave & Buster's could not get them in. Like they tried to get them in and they just couldn't.
They got one batch.
Yeah, we would get we got one batch total for months before we saw another system in the local Dave & Buster's store, because they just couldn't get them. That's how high in demand these Nintendo Switches were. Well, the one at Zone 28 was priced exactly the same as the ones at Dave & Buster's at 100,000 tickets. Except the one in Zone 28.
Well, I was going to bring that up
The
later.
one in Zone 28 had a little extra with it. I mean, we'll get to that, but I didn't know that at first when I texted Mike and said, because he was looking for where to redeem a Switch, to try to turn a profit. And I mean, it's what he does. If you read the Wired article or the Cracked article, it's what he does. I mean, it's his free time. So, but I'll let him get back here and continue his story.
Okay, so actually, I got 2 of the Switches from Dave & Buster's, and I sold them off while they were hot. I really didn't have any linchpin title that was going to make me keep a Switch, but we're going to get to that. So Joe tells me they have a Switch, it's Zone 28, and he also tells me they have some of the same games that Dave & Buster's just got. And this focus is going to be on 2 of them. Pop the Lock and Quick Drop. Pop the Lock has a variable difficulty setting, like easy, normal, hard, very hard. They had theirs set on normal, which is easier than Dave & Buster's, because Dave & Buster's didn't even let Pop the Lock get out of their test period before they increased the difficulty and lowered the price, because there were people that could not control themselves and won multiple hundred thousands of tickets a day at the stores it was being tested at. So by the time I got my hands on it, it was already ruined, but not at Zone 28.
Real quick, I think you said they lowered the price on. I think you mean they meant they lowered the jackpot on, not the price.
Yes.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify that for anyone listening who may have picked up on that.
Thank you. So they lowered the jackpot from 500 to 250 at Dave & Buster's, but it was still 500 at Zone 28. The big thing, Quick Drop. It's the game where you have to drop 50 balls into buckets over a certain amount of time. The amount of time you have is operator set. The default on the machine that you get to play a game is 22 seconds. Dave & Buster's was getting killed bad enough that they changed it to 20, and I understand that for the same reason Pop the Lock got changed. Zone 28 was still at the factory default of 22 with a 500 ticket jackpot. I knew that I wanted to get this Switch as a personal vendetta against how I felt I was treated the first time I went to Zone 28. However, I also knew, based on how quickly they changed things, that if I didn't get all these tickets in one day, they were going to change the settings and it was going to be pretty much impossible for me to come out ahead. So this was going to be half the done in one day. Well, it actually took 2 days because they rolled out Half Price Wednesday, and I had Tuesday and Wednesday off from a long vacation. I had extra holidays I had to take. I went in on Tuesday and I didn't let anyone know I was there. I went in, I loaded up 2 cards with $100. I did a recon mission. Basically like Solid Snake sneaking around. I go and I'm playing games and seeing what's on what settings, and I knock out 9,000 tickets on, $30 maybe on full price. But more importantly, I know how the games are set, and I know what tomorrow's going to be. So I go in, I look at this Switch, and there's 4 games with it. It's not just the Switch, I was told. It's Switch plus 1-2 Switch, Breath of the Wild, ARMS, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I tell Joe this, and he says some words that I can't repeat on this podcast.
Yeah, I was a little upset because if I'd known the games came with it, I would have taken it myself and not told Mike at all, because then he would have had no idea that the Switch was there, because he was hell-bent on not going back to Zone 28 at all just because of that first Part 1. But alright guys, that does it for Part 1 of this podcast. Stay tuned for Part 2 in a future episode.